Hello everyone, my name is Abhinav Patel and I'm going to tell about the problem of ancient Greek philosophy with Ankit Muneswar, Abhishek Patel, Manish Das and Ashish Awasthi. And I'm now going to start with introduction to ancient Greek philosophy. So first question arises in our mind is what is Greek philosophy? So there is two approach, etymological approach and a real approach. First is the answering the question what is Greek philosophy is to explore the etymology of the Greek word philosophia. The term philosophy is a compound word that means it composed of philos and sophia. Philos means love and sophia means wisdom. So it literally it means love of wisdom. Real approach. For the ancient Greek philosopher, true reality was uncommon, quite different from the world of common sense, although it is dangerous to generalize for the ancient Greeks. The philosophers sought to know that reality which was concealed and distorted by the word of common sense. The knowledge was the wisdom that philosophers loved. Ancient Greek philosophy generally distinguished human being from other sentient being by asserting that the former had the capacity to philosophize. Often they explained this by postulating that human being possessed reason or some such expression. Distinguish a human being from other sentient being was the capacity for self-transcendence. There was a subversive undercurrent in Greek intellectual culture standing in opposition to the basic assumptions shared by the all philosophers. In spite of their diversity, these anti-philosophers believed the goal of philosophy was unattainable. Either there is no reality to know behind the word of common sense, or if is such a reality, it is inaccessible to human beings. The sophists fall into the first class of anti-philosophers while the skeptics fall into the second class. Now I am going to tell about the pre-Socratics. The root of Western philosophy or to be found in the pre-Socratic philosophers, beginning in the 6th century BC. These philosophers lived as the term implies before Socrates, so that they obviously did not consider themselves as pre-Socratics. This is a term that was imposed upon them by later generations. The fact that they are called pre-Socratics implies that ancient Greek philosophy should be organized around Socrates and Plato. This implies that all pre-Socratic philosophers were preliminary to or preparatory of Socrates and Plato. That this is true is, however, a pre-assumption that should not necessarily to be accepted as fact. Most of so-called pre-Socratics comes from the eastern or western part of the Greek world. Athens would no later enter the philosophical fray.
I am going to tell you about Alexander and the Thales. Alexander, born in 610 BC in the Miletus, now it is in Turkey, died in 546 BC. He was the very great Greek philosopher who was the first to develop a cosmology or systematic philosophical view of the world. But only a short fragment of Alexander's work survives, so reconstruction of his philosophy and astronomy must be based on summaries by later Greek writers, such as 1st and 2nd century CE compiler of philosophical opinion Hietus, and 3rd century theologian and anti-pope Hippolytus, and the 6th century Neapolitanist philosopher Sammalicus. Anaximander is said to have been a pupil or associate of the great Greek philosopher Thales the Miletus, and to have read about astronomy, geography, and the nature of the thing. Anaximander set up genome. It is known as the shadow casting rod at Sparta, and used it to demonstrate the equinox or solstice and perhaps hours of the day. He drew a map of the known world, which was later corrected by his fellow Milesians. The author Hecataeus, a well-traveled man, he may also have built a celestial globe. Now I am going to tell you about the Thales or Miletus. The ancient Greek philosopher Thales was born in the Miletus in the Greek Ionia. Aristotle, the major source of Thales' philosophy and science, identified Thales as the first person to investigate the basic principle, the question of the originating substances or matter, and therefore as the founder of the school of the natural philosophy. Thales was interested in almost everything, investigating almost all areas of the knowledge, philosophy, history, science, mathematics, engineering, geography, and politics. He proposed theory to explain many of the events of the nature. The primary substance of the support of the earth and the cause of the change. Thales was much involved in the problem of astronomy and provided the number of explanations of cosmological events which traditionally involve supernatural entities. His Questions approach to the understanding of the heavenly phenomena was the beginning of the Greek astronomy. Thales' hypothesis were the new and the bold, and in the freezing phenomena from godly intervention, he paved the way toward the scientific endeavor. He founded the Milesian school of natural philosophy, developed the scientific method, and initiated the first Western Enlightenment. The number of anecdotes is closely connected to the Thales invention of the cosmos. When considered in the association with the hypothesis, they take on added meaning and the most enlightenment. Thank you.
Who is born in 470 BC in Athens, situated in Greece, and died in 399 BC in Athens, is a Greek philosopher whose way of life, character, and thought exerted a profound influence on ancient and modern philosophy. Socrates was widely recognized and controversial figure in his native Athens, so much so that he was frequently mocked in the place of comic dramatist. The best example is Clouds of Aristophanes, produced in 423 BC. The best known example. Although Socrates himself wrote nothing, he is depicted in composition by a small circle of his admirers, that are Plato and Xenophon, first among them. He is portrayed in these works as a man of great insight, integrity, self-mastery, and argumentative skill. The impact of his life was all greatest because of the way in which it ended. At the age of 70, he was brought to trial on a charge of impiety and sentenced to death by poisoning. He was poisoned by hemlock by a jury of his fellow citizens. Plato's apology to Socrates purports to be the speech Socrates gave at his trial in response to accusation made against him. Its powerful advocacy of the examined life and its condemnation of Athenian democracy have made it one of the central documents of the Western thought and the culture. Now we'll tell about the philosophy of the Socrates. While Socrates was alive, he was, as noted, the object of comic ridicule. But most of the plays that make reference of him are entirely lost or exist only in fragmentary form. Clouds being the chief expectation, although Socrates is the central figure of this play. It was not Aristophanes proposed to give a balanced and accurate portrait of him. Comedy never aspires to his, but rather to use him to present certain intellectual trends in contemporary Athens, the study of language and nature, and as Aristophanes implies, the amorism and atheism that accompany his pursuits. The value of the play as the reliable source of knowledge about Socrates is thrown further into doubt by the fact that in Plato's Apology, Socrates himself rejected it as a fabrication. That aspect of the trial will be discussed more fully below. Soon after Socrates' death, several members of his circle preserved and praised his memory by writing books that present him in his most characteristic activity, conversations that interlocutors in these typically adversarial changes include people he happened to meet, devoted followers, prominent political figures, and leading thinkers of the day. Many of these Socratic decursors, as Aristotle calls them in his Poetics, are no longer expand. There are only brief remnants of the conversation written by Antisthenes, Aeschines, Plato, and Euclides, but those composed by Plato and Xenophon survived in their entirety.
So my topic is Plato and its philosophical point of view. So as we know, Plato was a Greek philosopher known and recognized for having allowed such a considerable philosophical work. The sensible world, according to Plato, is the world of contingent, contrary to the intelligible world, which contains essences or ideas, intelligible forms, models of all things, having the phenomena and give them meaning. At the top of essences is the idea of good, which surpasses in dignity and passes the supreme principle is identical the divine. So Plato often presents his doctrine in a particular form, that of dialogue, in which Socrates occupied a more prominent, that in fact that master philosopher embedded in some sense the playmaker. So, in adapting his work with dialogue, so Plato has thus demonstrated an important dimension inherent in the search for truth. It takes two or more, and this mediation is only able to move us beyond the particular views to us access to the universal. So, what we are able to know, what is indeed a dialogue? So, when two people are face to face and confront two types of beliefs in a debate organized, this discussion is called for dialogue. But the dialogue itself is a basic aspect of the dialectic that we must now define and describe. So, Plato dialectics, essences, and the good. So basically, dialectic refers to a process and then itinerary, a gradual ascent towards the truth, away from illusions and beliefs purely sensitive or imaginative, as you know. The thought arises and the views from the doxa. So basically, it's contains some statement unsupported by rigorous reasoning, mixture of truth and error, sort of in between, intermediate between absolute nothingness and what is, to a knowledge of intelligence, order, and justified because. The first stage of rational knowledge is the data entry math, but this is so even beyond this mathematical truth. The culmination of the dialectic, the ideas of our essences and the good. So, for Plato, the sensible world is indeed an appearance of the ideas themselves, objects of pure thought, intelligible models of all things not perceived by sense, but far more real and more real than the empirical objects as such. So, the idea of a table is the ideal table. As we understand it by thinking model or paradigm that the concrete tables imitate and reproduce. In sum, the idea or essence, two terms served by the neighbor, are things in their purest forms, patterns of thought and reflection. This is the dialectic and methodically set route which concepts into concepts and propositions into propositions can achieve this ideal essences as well as the good, the culmination of a rational approach. Although the means end in the eyes of Plato, the divine, which is strictly speaking neither a concept nor a concept, but a supreme principle, higher than the existence and essence, the excess of our in dignity and power. Although this idea, because of all what is right and good, communicates his truth and light to all things knowable. So Plato, love and beauty. So the root to the essence can be understood as the dialectic of love, as Plato so aptly described in the Symposium. So, indeed, the momentum toward love of beauty is in the eyes of the philosopher, a powerful instrument of access to truth. So, intellectualized and disciplined love is confused with the dialectic which is embodies the vitality of end life. So, what indeed and that love? It is a lack, shortage, poverty, which we reported our incompleteness and our emptiness, and warning that we do not have an aspiration to beauty itself. Thanks to give him we can from bodily beauty and sensitive progress to the beauty of the soul, then to the occupational loss. Finally, the ultimate step is the same idea of beauty in its purity and independence, which may reach the philosopher. Thank you.
My name is Abhishek Patel and I am going to tell about Aristotle. Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher who is contributor to the foundation of both symbolic and scientific thinking in Western philosophy. He also made advance in the broad branch of philosophy known as the metaphysics, moving from the idealism of his mentor Plato to a more empirical and less mystical view of the nature of reality. Aristotle was the first philosopher to seriously major school of ethical thought, taken most seriously by the contemporary philosopher. With all these contributions, he may have been the single most important philosopher in history until at least the late of 18th century. As a young man Aristotle studied at Plato schools and remained there until Plato's death. Afterward, he served as a tutor with many people once Alexander began to counter to the majority of the known world. Like his mentor Plato, most Aristotle works was lost initially. Unlike Plato, his actual works were never recovered and instead recovered and instead we only have class notes from his students to give us an idea of what Aristotle's views and beliefs actually were. During the medieval period, his work was initially shunned by the contemporary philosophers because of their primary concern with the theoretical questions. The view of Plato and the later philosopher Plato were judged more compatible with Aristotle than the scientific and essentially pagan view of Aristotle that changed when St. Thomas Aquinas synthesized the Aristotle view with his own Catholic theology, reintroducing Aristotelian philosophy to the world and stabilizing the foundation for the scientific advances of the Enlightenment. Aristotle rejected the idea of Plato theory from the which stated the idealized essence of the object extracted apart from that object. Plato, though that the physical things were representative of the idealized, performed that extended in another plane of reality. Aristotle thought that the essence of an object existed with the thing itself. In the way, he also rejected the idea of a soul that existed outside of the physical body. Instead, he believed that the human consequences resided completely with the physical form, and Aristotle thought simply that the best way to gain knowledge was through natural philosophy, which is what we should now call science. Despite the belief, many of theories that Aristotle put forth have not held up to the passing of time and scientific advancement. This is to his method crude science constantly examines hypotheses through experimentation and gradually replaces claims that cannot hold up with stronger claims. Thank you.